Hi, and welcome to the History Respawn podcast. I'm your host, Bob Whitaker. Today's episode is our 2021 History Game Award Show. In this episode, we will choose the History Game of the Year and give out awards for a number of fun categories, including Best History Game for people who don't like history, Dad-Friendly History Game, and Best History Game for the classroom. But before we get started with all that, let me introduce my co-host on today's episode, recent collegiate esports championship coach, Professor John Harney. Hey, John.
Hey, Bob. How are you?
Pretty good. So yet again, it's been about a month and a half since we have recorded a podcast. And in that time, we have been playing games and getting on with our life. But in addition to the normal activities of college academics, John Harney has also now been crowned a championship esports coach. So, John, could you fill our listeners in, before we get to the awards show, could you fill our listeners in into your championship story?
Sure, I'd be happy to. So Centre College fields teams in Overwatch and Rocket League, and we compete in something called the National Esports Collegiate Conference, the NECC, which is actually an organization that grew out of a New England Collegiate Conference. And we had a good experience with them last year, and so we signed up again in the autumn. And our Overwatch team went 4-0, and they kind of promoted us mid-season, which was awesome, but also we would have walked that division, and instead we kind of, we were respectable in the next division up. And the Rocket League team then was in a different kind of a situation, and the way they do it is they do placements so that you're in a division with about 11, between 8 and 11 teams that are similar skill level to you. So you can win a championship for that particular group, that particular division. And the Rocket League team started really hot and then had a terrible second half to the season. Basically, most of that team are actually on an athletics team, and so they were moving kickoffs all the time, and they had to forfeit a game, and it was a bit of a mess. But they got their act back together for the playoffs, and in particular, the men's soccer season ended before the esports playoffs began. And so Centre College Rocket League were an 8th seed in our division in an 8-team playoff. Yeah. And we won the whole thing. Wow. And it was I was thrilled for
rags
them.
To riches.
Pretty excited. I'm telling you, real
Leicester City's got nothing on you.
That's right. Yeah, my record's quite good. My win percentage, as Americans say, is not bad. So I'm hoping that I will be handing the reins over to somebody this summer, and I can say that's it. Like Costanza, I'm out. I'm going to leave while I'm on a high here.
So, do you get like a championship banner? Did you, have a champagne party or anything like that? What was? Tell me about the celebration and the awards.
Well, they're sending us in true college style. I bought some pizza for the students. They hung out and tried to get Steam to work on one of the machines in the lobby, kind of thing. And but we have T-shirts coming, and we have a trophy coming. So I'm looking forward to presenting that to the team, get some photographs, and then we're hopeful we'll have an esports space at Centre College, maybe in the autumn of 2021. So that'd be a really cool kind of part of the opening ceremonies, would be to officially rehome the trophy from, Harney's office, which is where it's going to be for the spring, into the actual esports space.
So I wonder with the trophy, is it going to look like a sports trophy, or is it going to be like a giant golden gamepad or a mouse and keyboard? What are we talking about here?
That's such an interesting in esports. I think it's going to be like a sports trophy, but esports is such an interesting space because they oscillate wildly between wanting to effectively be sports, like traditional sports, and then just doing their complete own random thing. And it just depends. So the trophy, I think, will be pretty standard. It'll probably look like one of those Jeff Keighley things he hands out, like a bit of wood with some acrylic on top. We won't be complaining. We're thrilled.
Yeah,
we're delighted.
Sure. Yeah. Take that for a CV line. How many historians have got that? Esports championship coach. Incredible.
I know. I wrote a letter of rec for a student the other day, and I've only taught her once, and so most of the letter was I know her as her coach, and she's great. And it was such a strange letter to write because usually it's like, oh, they got this grade, and they're really good in the group discussions, and I really like the stuff they hand in, and you should 100% accept this person to where they're going to get their PhD or their BM or whatever. And for her, it was like, well, she's great, and I have a very not normal way of knowing why she's great.
It's like a character reference, I guess.
Yeah, exactly.
In that sense.
Yeah.
That's so fun.
Yeah, it was wild.
Well,
It's a lot of
congratulations.
fun, and
Yeah.
yeah. Well, thank you. It's the future. It's exploding. Like I think so many high schools in the US have esports teams now, and I I was contacted by a professional esports team out of Europe who are trying to develop a kind of an academy, like a pipeline for college talent into the into
Wow.
pro esports.
Wow.
So they're proactively reaching out to small liberal arts colleges in Kentucky. That's how big a deal this is getting.
Wow. That is awesome.
Yeah.
It's like Football
Yeah.
Manager or something, you know?
Yeah, no, exactly. It's crazy. It's absolutely crazy.
Well, and and thinking about playing games competitively, it's even I would say probably a harsher age limit than other professional sports or other, athletic competitions where,
Hmm.
I would say a lot of professional athletes today can now regularly play into the late 30s, which I think is kind of a recent development of the last 20 years with medical science. But esports players, I mean,
Yeah.
Overwatch and Rocket League, fighting games, I feel like your career is kind of done when you're 27, 28.
Oh yeah. It's like gymnastics, honestly. I mean, like
Yeah.
that's one of the chat. So center's interesting. So the NCAA doesn't do any esports yet, but because we're Division Three, so for people listening, especially people who aren't American, what on earth are they talking about? Division Three, which is what center is in athletics, we are not allowed to give scholarships to players. Like it's not, the rules forbid it, and it's completely, they come for academics and they can play athletics while they're there. Whereas Division One, like at Texas, where Bob and I both went, that was a different situation entirely, where there's 95,000 people coming to see the football team, and all these guys are on paid scholarships and all that kind of thing. So esports is in a really weird space, because what do you do? And I think one of the big challenges you have is, how do you set up a pipeline where by the time a traditional age student graduates college, age 22 in the United States, they're kind of done at that point.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
it's unlikely they're going to then hit the pro scene.
Wow.
They,
Yeah.
So we'll see. We'll
Yeah.
see.
Yeah.
Things could change. It could change.
Awesome. Yeah. Well, this will go on the front page of the the website History Respawn. I mean, how many video game podcasts have esports championship coach
go.
material on their advisory committee, let alone co-hosting the show? I mean, it's amazing. I'm very impressed. Okay, well let's turn to our own list of champions for history games in 2021, and I was going to read out a list before we got started with the awards, a list of games under consideration. These are a list of history games that John and I have played over the course of this year, and these are not in any particular order, not really in any real sensical order, not even alphabetical order. These are just kind of the games as they occurred to me right before recording this. So the list of games include Age of Empires 4, Thatcher's Tech Base, Discovery Tour Viking Age, March Through Time, which if you don't know was the MLK in Fortnite mode, New World, Humankind, Blackhaven from Historiated Games, Old World, Oregon Trail, and this is the new version that came out on Apple Arcade this year from Gamesloft, Hell Let Loose, Forgotten City, Overboard, Nebuchadnezzar, Svoboda 1945 from Charles Games, Stronghold Warlords, Narita Boy, Jupiter Hell, Loop Hero, High Fleet, Armored Commander 2, Valheim, and Wildermyth. So that is the list of games that we have come into contact with over the course of this year. And briefly, we have got a set of categories that we used last year, and we've kind of somewhat updated them from last year. And so I'll read those out now, and kind of leads up to our game of the year. So these categories include shout out games, and these are games that we wish we had played more. Best stocking stuffer. These are games that are small and quick, and then you could give as a gift if you're still in the gift giving mood. History games for people who don't like history. Dad-friendly game, best history game character, history topic we learned the most about from a history game, best game for the history classroom, worst history game of 2021, and this was a suggested category from our History Respawn Discord. Thank you. Most anticipated history game of 2022. 2021's history game of 2022. This is a game from this year that we plan to play a lot more of next year. 2020's history game of 2021. This is a game from last year that we ended up playing a lot this year. History game of 2021, and then non-history game of 2021. So those are the games, those are the categories, and I guess we could get started. And so, John, I've been talking for a while. So for our first category, shout-out games, give us your response and give us your awards for shout-out games, history shout-out games for 2021.
Sure. So for me, it's kind of a hybrid of games I need to play more, but also kind of games that don't feature later as much as thought I would. The first one would be Stronghold Warlords, which is kind of the latest Stronghold game, and it's got a East Asia focus and a couple of interesting looking DLCs. One focused on the Mongol Empire, another focus, I believe, I think it's the Romance Kingdoms, the Three Kingdoms period. And, you know, for anyone who's ever played a Stronghold game, they're kind of they go back a long time, the Stronghold games, and they're kind of these quasi city builder kind of, a little bit like Age of Empires, but arguably more static type of a situation, I guess is what I'd call them. Mm-hmm. And Stronghold games have been an up and down now for a few years. I played a bit of this and it was all right. We might talk about Age of Empires 4 more later. It really is a kind of a retro experience, and if you want to play a Stronghold game, it seems like a good bet. So that was one. And then another game I'd love to I kind of dipped my toe into it and didn't quite find the time, even though by all accounts it's not a very time-consuming game, is Lake, which in the 20 minutes I did play of it was really charming, and I was just really intrigued and a little bit horrified by how recently it's set in the sense of being a history game. So those are kind of my two. Stronghold Warlords, I think, just deserves a better look, and just let people know that it's kind of out there, and especially if it's on sale, I think would be maybe worth a quick look. Mm-hmm. And then I'm really intrigued by Lake and would love to spend more time with it in the future.
Yeah, so Lake,
how about you, Bob?
Lake, for those of you who don't know, is a game, I think it's set in the late 80s, right?
Yeah.
And you play as somebody who is taking up a position of a male person in the Pacific Northwest. And so that's a game that I wanted to put down for shout-out games, but I didn't even have time to boot it up. I've got it loaded on my computer, and I didn't have the time. So I suppose that's a shout-out game for me. But my shout-out history game for 2021 is Humankind from Amplitude Studios. And this is the 4X game, kind of designed to be a challenger to Sid Meier's Civilization that came out in the fall. And this is a game that I was pretty lukewarm on, I think. I mean, especially compared to some other critics out there. I just felt like it had made maybe some weird decisions, especially with regards to how it appropriated history and, you know, how it was presenting the past. And, you know, it wasn't even an interesting game to play. But at the same time, it's a game that I feel like I should spend more time with, and I should have spent more time with. And, you know, it just didn't really strike me as much as I thought it would, especially given the fact that I'm such a huge fan of the 4X genre. So it's a game that I feel like it deserves a shout out, and it deserves a second chance, maybe early next year.
Yeah, Humankind, and I might talk about it again later if another certain game comes up. I feel like a lot this year, Old World and Humankind ended up in my brain in the same space of my head a lot when I was thinking about these kinds of games. And one of them kind of stuck there, and I kind of developed, you know, feelings for. And the other, and I want a Humankind. I like 4X games. I love Amplitude, love everything they've ever done, and I do like Humankind, but I didn't find myself playing it as much as I thought I would. Mm-hmm. And I think a lot of people had that reaction. Mm-hmm. So it's interesting, but I think, Bob, it's worth your time to give it a bit more love next year.
I'll do it. And
there's cool stuff going on in that game.
Yeah, and they'll come up with new content. So I think, yeah, I mean, I think they've got more DLC packs coming out. So yeah, maybe one of those will grab me. But yeah, it's the perfect game, I think, for me for this category, because it's like, I wanted to play more of it. I wanted to like it more. Didn't quite get there, but maybe next year. We'll see. Okay, next category, best stocking stuffer game. This is a game that people don't really buy physical games anymore. But if you did, this would be a game that maybe you throw into a stocking, especially a stocking of somebody who's interested in history. And my stocking stuffer game is called Hell Let Loose. And this is a online multiplayer World War II shooter from a studio called Black Matter. And this is a game that came out for free if you have PlayStation Plus. Came out as a free PlayStation Plus game, I think maybe in September or October, I want to say. And this is a game that I got a chance to play over the holiday break. So in the past couple of weeks, I played it on my PlayStation 5, but it's also on the PC, the Xbox, all of those. And this is a game that I think is perfect for this category because it's relatively inexpensive. It's on sale right now via Steam and PlayStation Online, Xbox for around $25. And it's a game that I got a lot of enjoyment out of. And John, I don't know if you've gotten a chance to play it, but what makes this game interesting is it has a lot in common with the recent World War I kind of online shooters like Verdun and Tannenberg, where it is attempting to be more realistic with the Second World War. So I think if you've got somebody in your life who is interested in first-person shooters, cooperative shooters online, and is interested in the Second World War, this one has a lot to recommend it.
Yeah, I'm a little intimidated by it. To be honest, like, there's kind of these big scale realistic team shooters.
Yeah, and it's funny because they use realistic maps for the setting of these levels or these online multiplayer matches. So realistic maps, but that also means that your spawn points are usually really far away from the front line, and so you're really having to kind of hoof it in order to get to the front line. And it's very often the case that, you take like 10, 15 minutes to get to the front line, and then you're spending about 5 minutes in actual combat, and then you die, right? And so it's weird because like the actual combat time is probably much less than what you're used to with, say, like Call of Duty or Battlefield. But the in-game experience and kind of the realistic nature of that experience, it actually makes it, I think, more interesting than some of those other shooters, Now, one thing I would say is that, I think this game works as a stocking stuffer because it's relatively cheap. So if somebody didn't like the game that you got them, it wouldn't be that big of a deal. And I think there's an opportunity here to, maybe take a chance with a gift, and if it doesn't work out, not that big of a deal. And there is a chance that's, this person in question might not like it because it's so different from Call of Duty or from Battlefield. I'd say it's a little bit closer to Battlefield than Call of Duty, but in both cases, this is a game for kind of hardcore history nuts and not necessarily for somebody interested in that kind of Call of Duty experience.
Yeah. Well, for me, and looking at a stocking stuffer, I kind of took advantage of. There's been a bunch of games in the last year or so that kind of hit this kind of meta itch of like what it's like to play an old game. Like in a culture where you can buy a slightly weird, smaller Super Nintendo or Mega Drive and plug it into your TV and play these old games. These are modern games that either feel old or are deliberately evoking something old. So Narita Boy is an example of that, which is interesting. Narita Boy doubles up as actually being historically set as well. So it's set in the 80s. It's got chiptune style music, and you're effectively, the player character is locked into a kind of Japanese style computer game. That it's kind of a roguelike kind of platformer action type thing. Jupiter Hell, which was a kind of a more modern version of something called Doom RPG, which was on for a long time. Jupiter Hell has one of the few games that I played at work in spells. I found myself playing it between students coming to visit me. Is how much I got stuck into that.
Wow.
But my winner though, the one I went with was Loop Hero,
Hmm.
which for people who haven't played it is it's not an historically set game. Now it is, and I use this loophole all the time. It's kind of set in this kind of medieval slash fantasy world that is very obviously leaning hard into whether you consider it the medieval world or just kind of a modern popular memory of the medieval world.
Hmm.
Think of a kind of a Dungeons and Dragons slash thing or slash 80s board game type thing. And Loop Hero, the music, the artwork, everything about it, it feels like a game, written and produced in like 1988.
Hmm.
But it has all these little, like a lot of these games, lots of little quality of life things that make it much easier to play. And it's cheap to begin with. It's $20, I think, and on sale it goes down to about $10 or so. And it's a great little game that you can kind of play and just you just kind of get into the loop of it, as it were.
Yeah.
So there's bits of progress to keep you going and everything, but it's a great little game to dip in and out of for a while. Either you fall in love with it and play a lot of it, or you kind of go, that was a nice 2 hours, and you move on with your life. So Loop Hero for me. That was
Nice.
a good game.
Cool. So our next category is history game for people who don't like history. And my selection for this one comes from one of our favorite studios, game development studios here at History Respawn. That's Inkle Studios, the makers of Heaven's Vault and 80 Days. And their most recent game is a game called Overboard. And this is one that is available, I think, definitely PC. I know it's available on the Switch, and I also think it's available on mobile, cell phones and tablets as well. And so this is a game that is taking advantage of kind of Inkle Studios' strengths, which is narrative, capacity and writing, and their games are. This one is kind of cut from the same cloth as 80 Days, so it's like a really complicated choose your own adventure game. And this one is set in 1935 on a ship that is traveling from Britain to America, and you are about 8 hours away from landing in New York, and you play a former West End actress named Veronica Villanzy. And she has decided to kill her husband while on this voyage. And you are playing basically as the murderer, and you are trying to escape justice before you land in New York, where you can ostensibly escape into safety, basically. And so this is a really fun game because it's a history game. It has major history elements. It's set in 35, and so there's very much a sense of the interwar period. There's very much a sense of politics and diplomatic relations going on in the Atlantic world during this time period. And I don't want to spoil too much because it kind of conflates some with the character development. But I think it works for people who don't like history because it is primarily a murder mystery in which you are playing the murderer. And it reminds me a lot of the old novels, like Raymond Chandler novels. It reminds me a lot of Agatha Christie, of course. But it also reminds me of an old Alfred Hitchcock movie called Rope. John, I don't know. Have you?
I know Rope. Yes,
you know Rope.
I've seen Rope.
So Rope is one of Hitchcock's early films. I want to say it actually came out in the mid 1930s, maybe early 1940s, something in there. But it is a really interesting film because it starts with the murder, and you see the murder, and you see who commits it, and basically the whole movie is like a bottle episode of a sitcom in which everything takes place in one room, and you're trying to figure out, will the murderers get caught? And that's basically how Overboard works. So Overboard, Inkle Studios, lots of historical elements in this, lots of great historical context, really great characters who touch on major historical events of this time period. But I think it works for people who don't like history because it's a great murder mystery.
And that also sounds like when Warner Brothers finally gets stacked together and decides to license a Columbo game. Inkler are the people to go to.
Speaking of Columbo, I saw somebody was passing around on Twitter a supercut from Columbo, and it was all of the segments in all of the Columbo episodes. I think the video lasted like 3 minutes, but it was all the segments in all the Columbo episodes in which he was eating food or talking about food. It was really hilarious. But this game, Overboard, this is something I want to talk about next year on History Respawned. This is right in my wheelhouse. And in fact, when I was writing my dissertation on the history of international crime, a big part of that story of international crime during the early part of the 20th century was crime actually committed on ships, right? And then who had jurisdiction. So lots of interesting stories there. So I can't wait to do an episode on Overboard.
Cool. Yeah, well, so for me, in terms of this game, I'm cheating all the time. An honorable mention again for me. We might talk about this more in a few minutes, but the game Forgotten City, I think, is definitely an option here. For people who don't know, it began life as a Skyrim mod. And so to this day, it really kind of plays like one of those Elder Scrolls games, which at this point, because I think everyone has played Skyrim in the world. It's like that was the old Wayne's World joke about the Fleetwood Mac album Rumors, that they just issued them when you moved to the suburbs, and Skyrim is that in video games. And so I think that's good because that makes it easy to onboard yourself into the game. And then although the game has a heavy historical theme setting, lots of really cool stuff, actually, it kind of feels like an Assassin's Creed type situation as well, because there's this mixture of kind of the present and kind of arcane stuff and this kind of historical exploration. But the one I actually picked for a history game, people who don't like history per se, is Valheim. And for people who didn't get a chance to play this game, Valheim is a good game, which actually I need to play more in the future, where you're kind of a Norse person, kind of living in some kind of strange afterlife, effectively, although it is based on kind of not a limbo exactly, but kind of a plane between different types of afterlives, or interacting with these various deities and supernatural beings and everything. But the game effectively is a survival / building game. So in fact, there was an article, I think it was on PC Gamer only this week, kind of saying that Valheim is my new Minecraft. And so I think that Valheim definitely scratches that itch. And so if you have someone in your life who likes those kinds of games, the Minecraft or various survival / building, you build a house for yourself, then you build up your tech and so on and so on, Valheim would totally be an option. And there's very heavy historical theme there then, if the player wants to get into it.
Nice.
So yeah, and just a really kind of it blew up early in the year, where I think it sold 1 million copies in no time or something. It's got a small development team, and but it's definitely, it's a good game.
Really a lot of great work done by small development teams this year. Forgotten City, I think, is made by 4 people.
That's right.
And then Inkle Studios is very small too. So really strong category for small studios, history games for people who don't like history. So
yeah, the stuff that people can put together in these small groups is truly astonishing now.
Yeah.
Especially if they can outsource maybe the music or one of the big things they can't quite do themselves.
Yes.
And so, so that's, so in terms of like pulling people in then, so for the dad-friendly game, we'll switch around. I'll go first.
Thank you.
I want to, if you don't mind.
No, please. I was going to do most of the heavy lifting because you'd won a championship. I figured you were tired from partying. Yeah,
I know, walking around the city holding it aloft. I want to give my honorable mention again to Armored Commander 2, which is a really interesting game. The first Armored Commander is just available on GitHub if you wanted to. You could just go now and find it and download it. But Armored Commander 2, which was an early release for a long time, but officially came out in 2021, is wild. Again, it's another one of these games that feels like something produced and released in 1982. And so it would be a dad-friendly game for a dad who misses his Amiga, maybe. You know what I mean? Like, as it really kind of, or his Commodore 64. Is that what they were called in the US?
Yes.
It really feels like that, and it's World War II based, which officially makes it dad territory.
Mm-hmm.
Although we should say, as we did every year, the dad here is a metaphysical concept. Your dad in question could easily be a mom or an aunt or a sister or a brother or whatever.
Yes.
But there's a certain dad vibe. But I'm going to cheat a little bit because I know what Bob picked, and I have to confess that, Bob, I picked the same thing because I think there was a clear winner in this category this year. I think it won by an absolute like a country mile.
Yeah.
Do you want to share what you felt was the most dad-friendly game this year?
Yes, so dad-friendly game of the year, History Respawn 2021 official is Age of Empires 4 from Relic Entertainment.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Endorse. It is a dad game in its purest uncut form.
Yep.
It's a wild.
Put that on the back.
We should talk about why. I guess we should explain why. So
Age of Empires. This is a series that was originally developed by Ensemble Studios. They did Age of Empires 1 through 3 from basically the late 1990s through the early 2000s. And then the series kind of went defunct for about 15 years before Relic Entertainment, the makers of Company of Heroes, brought it back, and they did definitive editions for the original 3 games. And so this release, Age of Empires 4, is their first version, right? Basically, where they made it themselves and released it in the fall of this year, and it's a pretty remarkable game. It is very much a late 90s real-time strategy game set in the medieval world, and you are playing through campaigns that are very similar to the ones that came out with Age of Empires 2 in 98 or 99 or whenever that game came out. And in addition to having that old school RTS feel, this is a game that also includes highly produced, History Channel / BBC Two quality historical documentaries that you can collect while playing. Basically, you get them as kind of trophies for completing campaign levels. And so these videos, they cover all sorts of things from the use of a trebuchet to the social structure of the Mongolian horde, all sorts of interesting medieval topics, and done in a very highly produced, very slick manner. So this is, if you've got somebody, a dad, quote unquote dad in your life that enjoys sitting down and watching, BBC Two documentaries or watching stuff on the History Channel, old school History Channel stuff, not Ice Road Truckers, then this is a game for them.
Yeah, I can't emphasize that enough. Like, Bob isn't even exaggerating here. That's exactly what the game is like. It's absolutely wild to me. Mm-hmm. That it's such a, I don't know if discombobulating is quite the right word. It really throws me, but it is the game. It is the dad game of 2021, no question.
If you've got a quote unquote dad in your life that says, well, they don't make games like they used to, this is how they used to make them. This is it.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. And by the way, real quick aside, so many remasters now that, like, I feel like maybe 2 years ago, maybe even last year, we could have a conversation about, well, do we include remasters? Whereas now it's like, no, we can't. We actually can't do that because there's just so many.
There's so many.
It'd be crazy. And, I don't know if it was this year or last year that Age of Empires 2 remastered or Age of Empires Remastered came out.
Yes.
But Age of Empires 4 is better because it does all the things Remastered does, but it actually does have lots and lots of quality of life improvements that really put some people off. I mean, it sounds nice to play a 1995 game, but in practice, it's weird. Mm-hmm. Like, there's no right click and there's weird things like that in some of those games. So Age of Empires 4 solves those problems.
Yeah.
What about history game character?
Yeah, so my choice is somebody I came into contact over the past week, and that is our heroine for Inkle Studios Overboard, named Veronica Villensley, who is a West End actress, basically Britain's version of Broadway in London's West End, and she's fallen on hard times, and she's married a socialite who is a bit of a gambler. And so she married him for his money, but he's basically gambled away their fortune, partly in Britain, but then also on the ship on the way to America. And so she makes the decision to take her life in her own hands and murder her husband, hoping to not only get rid of him, but then also to collect the insurance money for his death. And so Veronica is very much the kind of the evil character, the villain. If you couldn't tell from her last name, she's the villain for Overboard, but she's also the protagonist. And so, her dialogue in this game is some of the sharpest and wittiest dialogue that I've seen in a game in a long time, probably since, Inkle Studios' previous games. And she is just kind of unrepentingly bad. But she's also kind of bad in a fun way, right? She kind of makes fun of people. There's she's the murderer. And so there is different sections of the ship that she can go on to try to cover her tracks. And one of the interesting sections is there's a chapel on the ship, kind of a small corner of the ship that has a little, some pews and then kind of a religious altar. And she can go there and have conversations with God about what she's done. And God responds and just kind of like, "You're evil. Like, go away. What are you doing here? Why are you praying to me?" And it's just fantastic to play a character who's just she's so uninhibited. She's just like, "I'm doing this. I'm going to try to survive." And is evil, right? We would consider her to be evil, but is also somebody who is fascinating. And I played the game, just couldn't wait to see what came out of her mouth. So yeah, Veronica Villancy, my best history game character, a murderer, best history game character for 2021.
I was going to give this to Hatshepsut, who was the second female pharaoh in Egypt's history,
yes,
which I know because of Old World. And but I just wanted to give a shout out very quickly to how successful Old World is at bringing its player characters to life and then their heirs as you go through your gameplay. I mean, I just thought that was so good. Hatshepsut, in the end, I had fun with her as a character. And she lived a long life, and she was just great. And then her kids were nowhere near as good. So it was a real thing. But this is okay. So I played Deathloop enough that it shouldn't have been in the shout out. I played it enough, but I haven't finished it. I'm saying that, Bob, just to make sure we're careful here, because my pick is Colt from Deathloop.
Yes, awesome.
The protagonist from Deathloop. I just want to say real quick about Deathloop because it kind of, well, speaking for myself, it doesn't actually really get into the rest of the podcast. Maybe Bob will talk about it later. I love the way the game looks. I love the way that game sounds. I love the character work. And for those who don't know, so Colt is the protagonist and you're the player character's character, and you're caught in this loop in a kind of a hedonistic / psychotic time loop trapped environment that is very reminiscent to me of The Prisoner, the classic 1960s English TV show. Yeah. And every level or every kind of area he enters, he's in a dialogue with Juliana, who's his kind of frenemy ish. I don't know yet.
That's a good
kind of working
description.
Yeah, and their dialogue, their back and forth is really good. And Colt, and I think this is so hard to do when you're controlling the character yourself, he's just so charming. I just really like him, and I really liked. I wish I'd finished it in time for the podcast, but he's great. He's great. He's emblematic of so many things I love about that game as well. Yeah,
and he's got a great style too. You can pick up different outfits for him by playing the game as kind of rewards for accomplishing different goals. But all of them are kind of directly pulled from black exploitation films of the early to mid 1970s, and a lot of his costumes end up making him look like Shaft. And he's awesome. And the voiceover work for that game is just remarkably good. And it has to be because there is a lot of dialogue, between Colt and Juliana. And so if those characters didn't have good voice acting, then it would really make the game drag. But they're really fantastic. They're wonderful.
And I think Deathloop is such an interesting example of a game that we'll totally cover for History Respawn, but isn't a classic history game per se. But, I was just listening to an episode of the Level Up podcast where of course, now I've forgotten her name, but the host, she speaks to composers, and they had the composer of Deathloop on. And initially, he was just told late 60s. That's literally all he was told. And then as they went through the process, they would give him, like, here's a one pager on such and such, a visionary, which are kind of the bosses you take on. And it was just fascinating to hear how they kind of built that together and how he went to jazz musicians. And it's such an interesting example of kind of a video game studio immersing itself in a kind of a cultural historical reading,
yes,
and then using it for what it wants to use it for.
I think that's
not to make a history game per se.
Yeah,
and it was great.
That's a great way to put it.
Yeah.
All right, so our next category is history topic we learn the most about, and so this is a topic that John and I came across during playing these games and actually learned something about the past from one of these history games. And so my answer is composite bows from Age of Empires 4. And so going back to our dad game category, the Age of Empires 4 has a campaign focused on the Mongols. And during the course of that campaign, you come into various videos describing elements of Horch archers and Genghis Khan and the history of Mongolia. And one of those videos includes a magnificent feature on the making and use of composite bows. And it includes a talk with kind of a leading scholar of horse archery and composite bows in the modern day. And it's just a remarkably good video. I'm sure you could find it on YouTube by this point. But if you want to find it for yourself, go and get Age of Empires 4. It's free on Game Pass from Xbox. So if you got a PC and you have got a PC that's capable of running this type of game, go and get Game Pass. I highly recommend. And go and check out this video because it changed my life, John.
It's the crazy thing about Age of Empires 4 is, like, you could easily be mistaken for, not making fun of it, of course, but like just, this is this crazy, stupid game. It's like, no. These videos are extremely informative and very good. Like, they're really well done. For me, it was Norse architecture of the Middle Ages. So I learned this year. And especially because when Valheim was first released and before they made some good changes to like how you build your house and stuff, but you had to go on YouTube and find a guy who was like, this is how to build a longhouse. Wow. And there was a little bit of sharing there of information with Assassin's Creed Valhalla.
Yeah,
which
definitely.
Is technically a 2020 release.
Yeah.
And so I feel like,
but there was a Discovery Tour also. So that came out this year.
That's right.
So,
that's right.
Yeah, there you go.
And I was going to say, like, in the last 12 months in particular, I feel like, the 20th century has dominated. I'm speaking as a 20th century historian myself, as are you, Bob, for the most part, right? Like late 1930s, 20th.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm used to that period dominating all kinds of cultural products. And I feel like we shouldn't call it the pre-modern period. That's a terrible term, but I feel like the Middle Ages / going to early modern is making a big push the last year or so.
Yeah.
So just in general, I feel like Old World's decision to end as early as it does, like, and just to not go Crusader Kings 3, which again is from 2020.
Yeah.
Like games before it, going, we're stopping in the 1400s. We're good there. And so, and that's pretty cool.
Yeah.
It's a pretty cool thing.
I think, on the one hand, and this is really a big aside, so just, go ahead and fast forward, dear listener, if you're not in the mood, if you want to hear more of the awards. But, I would say on the one hand, I'm really excited to see other eras of history get covered by games. And, in particular, more games about late antiquity or about the early Middle Ages or the late Middle Ages or the early modern era. But one of the things that kind of annoys me about that is that I feel like the games that come out about the modern era, particularly the 20th century, those are the games where you get a very complicated view of history. You get one that's a bit more based on contingency. You get one that's a bit more complicated by multiple perspectives on the past. Whereas I feel like games set in other eras of history, particularly the Middle Ages, those are still kind of the stereotypical view of those past eras. So the Middle Ages is about the Dark Ages. It's about the end of civilization, basically. And so on the one hand, I think it's great, but the other hand, I feel like those kinds of games set in other eras just kind of perpetuate old notions of periodization in history.
Mm-hmm. And these are, I mean, this is 101 series visits this a lot, right? And
Yeah.
going into our next category, nice segue, Bob. This is
Well,
something we
thank you.
talk a lot about with our students. Like, so the next topic was, was best game for the history classroom. And these are the kind of things we talk about. So regular listeners will know that Bob and I each kind of teach at our respective institutions a kind of a version of a history and video games type class.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know about you, Bob, but I'm always being asked by various people, oh, so it's the history of video games? I'm like, no, it's not at all. Maybe I'll do a day on that. But, we want students to make a game. We want them to think about what that means. And so every year we do our best game for the history classroom. And going off Bob's point about periodization, things like this, and trying to get the students to choose what to do, my best game is Wildermyth, which isn't a history game per se. A bit like Loop Hero earlier on, it relies very heavily on a kind of a fantasy idea, which is clearly based on a popular memory of the medieval world. But the reason I picked Wildermyth is that it effectively does procedurally generated storytelling,
Mm-hmm.
and does it really well.
Mm.
And I was reading reviews of this game going, I'm sure it's not that good. The Wildermyth's trick, and the reason I would like to get students to play it for an extended session and kind of report back and talk to me about it, is that you'll make choices for your team and you can sacrifice players sacrifice characters and so on. But what'll happen is the game is split into these kind of tales that have multiple chapters to them. So over the course of 4 chapters, as it were, these characters grow and their relationships with each other grow. And if they're particularly successful, they kind of become legendary in the area. And so you can retire a character and you can build a statue to them and kind of memorialize them.
Mm.
And other characters in the next, playthrough will mention that or refer to it. Or you can keep them on, and they're basically, so now instead of like 4 rookies, which you were in your first playthrough, now in your second play, and it's the same playthrough, but these are different areas, these are different campaigns and all kinds of stuff. They're like lots of like little mini campaigns. You can have like one super amazing legendary guy with 3 rookies or whatever the case might be. Mm-hmm. And so it kind of has this sustained thing. And so when I'm not sure yet if I'll ask them to buy it and play it, or maybe I think we'll do it together in groups in the classroom and just get them to talk about what happens when these characters effectively accumulate histories of their own, which then get plugged into these communities in a fantasy fictional setting. Like, this is what historians talk about all the time when we're looking at sources and stuff. So I think Wildermyth, I haven't done it yet, so fingers crossed, but I think the potential is big there. I'm excited about it.
That's really cool. I love the idea of following, kind of a group of heroes over their career, and then, kind of the memory of those heroes. It reminds me a bit of a game called Rogue Legacy, where you kind of follow a genealogy of heroes trying to, get through a dungeon. And it is, as the name suggests, it's a roguelite, right? So you're kind of making runs, but also you are dealing with the kind of past decisions and the past genetic deficiencies of previous heroes that you've used to try to get through the dungeon. So, and I always like, I should do Rogue Legacy for History Respawn. I was like, I couldn't really think of a good way to do it, but it sounds like Wildermyth has got some of those same sort of ideas and mechanics going on in something that's a bit more robust, at least in terms of story.
Yeah, totally. And what about you, Bob? What did you pick for best classroom game?
Yeah, best classroom game, I picked the new release from Charles Games, Svoboda 1945. And so Charles Games, they should be well known, hopefully, to listeners of History Respawn. They are the developers of the award-winning Attentat 1942. And so they develop history games that are adventure games set in Czechoslovakia in the Czech Republic during the Second World War, and then immediately after the Second World War. And so Svoboda 1945 deals with events in Czechoslovakia, particularly the Sudetenland, kind of Western Czechoslovakia, during the Second World War, and then what happened to that region after the war was over. And there is a lot of great historical material in here related to the Holocaust, related to forced expulsions of German Czech citizens in 1945. the treatment of Czech and German Czech citizens in the early Cold War era, really starting in 1946, going through 1948. And then a little bit of discussion, interestingly, of a topic I didn't know anything about, but the migration, the immigration of Czechs from the Ukraine in the post-war era. This is something I didn't even know there was a population of Czech citizens who lived in the Ukraine. But after the Second World War, they came back home. Basically, they were forced out by attacks from Russia, basically, and so they came back to this region of the Czech Republic. So really interesting. Kind of maybe that's a secondary winner for historical topics I learned the most about. And this is a game. It is basically an adventure game, a point-and-click adventure game. It is something that's available on just about any system. And I think they have a phone version as well. They have a phone version of Atenta 1942. So this is a game that I think would work really well in the classroom because it deals with a lot of interesting historical topics. It does so in a way that is informed by historians, by scholarship. Charles Games, they receive funding from the Czech Humanities Foundation, Charles University in Prague. And so this is something that relies on historians and historical scholarship. And then it's also something that is relatively cheap and runs on anything. And that is basically a perfect combination for a classroom game. And in addition, it only lasts about maybe 2.5 hours.
That sounds great. What they're doing is there's a lot of growth, I think, of academics starting to make their own games. Or to kind of play in that space and stuff. But I think Charles Games is doing a fantastic job.
Yeah.
And not just that, but like I've taken trailers of theirs and their website and shown it to like people in the theater program here at work who are interested in multimedia productions of their own and stuff like that. So it's exciting.
Yeah.
And I feel bad swinging from Charles Games, who we love, to a worse history game in 2021. Hey, Bob, I'm going to let you in a minute because I think there's a clear winner. But before we get to the clear winner, I have a weird, I don't know if it's a dishonorable mention or not, for New World.
Okay.
And I feel conflicted about it because I like New World and I don't. So if people don't know, New World was, Amazon Studios made a game that was actually pretty good. And it's an MMORPG where you're not actually colonizing North America or the Americas in the 1500s, but you kind of may as well be in the sense that you're in this slightly adjacent alternate, you're fighting strange spiritual beings, but the game takes a lot of visual language from kind of frontiersmen in, Kentucky and Virginia in the 1500s. And the opening cutscene features a guy effectively wearing a stylized take on a conquistador mask. And I don't have the problems with this game that some do, but I completely see why they have those problems. And I think that basing the stylistic and language and visual vocabulary of your video game on the colonization of the Americas in 2021, that was a choice, and I think that I don't know that I would have made that choice. And so I would. So I have really mixed feelings about it, but I think it was worth bringing up in this particular category just to put it out there of like, it was definitely a swing. I'll put it that way for sure. Yeah.
Well, maybe it's not surprising that a company like Amazon that is hoping to colonize space is interested in the history of colonization. I'll just put that out there. So my nominee for worst history game of 2021, and this is a category that was put forward on History Respawn's Discord. So thanks for the recommendation. And my nominee is March Through Time, which is basically Martin Luther King's and the March on Washington depiction in Fortnite. So this is a game that really, I feel, does a disservice to the March on Washington, to Martin Luther King, to the I Have a Dream speech. and is something that allows player characters to go in and get kind of the glossiest version of that history without much context, while also being able to promote and use emotes from Fortnite and also various skins that are available in Fortnite. So it is, I think it had the potential, I'm very much, people have listened to History Respawn. I'm very much a glass is half full with history games. And so I look at this as an opportunity, to reach an audience with history in incredibly the most popular game in the world, Fortnite. So I look at it as this is a great opportunity. This is something that probably should happen, right? If we're really serious about reaching people with good history, then it would have to appear eventually in something like Fortnite, right? So I don't have a problem with this kind of material appearing in Fortnite, but I do have a problem with it being this bad. And I feel like all of the press related to this game has just been awful. And, as an aside, if you haven't been listening to the show, I did attempt to do an episode with guest scholars on this mode, on March Through Time, and all of the guest scholars that I approached turned me down, right? So that should tell you enough about what the opinion they had of this game mode related to Fortnite. So, worst history game of 2021, my nominee is March Through Time.
And I think it's the winner. And I think, but it's such a great point, Bob. I mean, Jeepers, History Respawn in so many ways is built on the idea of meeting people where they live. There's no point in us sitting in our ivory towers and so on and so on. But there's a reason books work, and there's a reason. Like, we'll probably discuss MLK in my class in a week or two, probably the day after MLK Day when we come back from that holiday. Because, one of the ways they can approach making a game is biography, right? And it's like, so how do you think about this and talk about it? And this Fortnite implicate, I get, it also felt so shallow of like, this is what a bunch of like, I can say this now as a middle-aged man, what a bunch of middle-aged people thought young people would be into. Yeah. And there wasn't any effort to make it something substantive. And there's so many other examples of substantive discussions, interactions in games and in simulations and you name it. So it was not good.
I mean, it is, it's really bad, and it's just horrific, honestly. So I'm glad we didn't spend more time on it, honestly, in the show. I mean, I wanted to cover it just because I felt like it was important, but not because I thought it was good. And that, that happens occasionally with History Respawn. So, but not often, thankfully. So, all right, well, let's get out of that terrible category and let's turn our attention to next year. And so our next category is most anticipated game of 2022. And so I've got a list here of games, history-related games that are supposedly coming out next year. Now, we know with the pandemic, things have been really weird with game development, like anything else. So we'll see if these actually come out. But this list of games that are coming out in 2022 include Nightingale, which is a crafting and survival game with the 19th century flair that's being created by former BioWare developers. The next game is Steel Rising, which is a steampunk French Revolution game with robots. Horizon Forbidden West, which has a lot of historical elements to it, even though it's not really a history game. A Plague Tale Requiem, which is the sequel to A Plague Tale, which is a game that we should have covered for History Respawn. We just haven't done it yet, so maybe this new game will force us to do so. Company of Heroes 3, God of War Ragnarok, and then lastly, Victoria 3 from Paradox, which probably won't come out next year, but we'll see.
Pinch of salt.
It's been announced, but Victoria 3, maybe not. We'll see. So, John, what is your award winner for most anticipated history game of 2022?
I'm very excited for Horizon Forbidden West. I love the first game. Victoria 3, if it comes out, I am so curious to see what they do, because for those who don't know, like in Victoria 2, the Victoria games are more Paradox games, like Europa Universalis and Crusader Kings and so on. But Victoria 2 was literally, building railroad tracks across the new world. You just, or across the world that you were colonizing. It's 19th century imperialism, the game. So
Yeah.
I'm really interested in what to do with Victoria 3 because in the current climate, which is a good climate, I think. I think that Paradox, I'm sure they understand they've got to be careful. They're making lots of interesting noises. So that is very much anticipated, but I suspect I'll be saying the same thing again this time next year. So I'm going to cheat and do something out of left field. And Bob doesn't know this is going to happen because I remembered this game after we started recording. But my actual one is Trek to Yomi, which I'm super excited about.
What's that again?
So it's this kind of side scroll. Well, I don't know if side scrolling, but it's you're a samurai whose master has just died, and it is an extremely, extremely stylish, beautiful looking game with some experienced and good game writers signed up to be the writers for it. I know so little about it. But I'm completely suckered in. It really feels, it's funny because, it was announced around at the time it was announced, Ghost of Tsushima kind of was at a high point or just come down off a high point. And Trek to Yomi feels like the intentionally intellectual, quiet, chill antidote to that game. And I like Ghost of Tsushima. I like that game a lot. But Trek to Yomi, is another samurai kind of a, cinematic type game, but with completely different, much more kind of indie vibe. So I'm excited about Trek to Yomi a lot.
Okay.
And I hope I'm right. I hope does come out. Maybe it will also be discussed this time next year alongside Victoria 3.
Published by Devolver Digital, which is,
yes.
I think one of our favorite publishers and developers. So yeah, awesome. Yeah, so Trek to Yomi. Good. I've got the Steam page pulled up here. Yeah, so it says release date 2022. We'll see. Fingers crossed.
We'll see.
Yeah. But my most anticipated game, and I feel like I've talked about this on the podcast a lot, is Horizon Forbidden West. I think this is a game that touches on a lot of interest of mine. It is kind of a mixture of sci-fi and adventure. It is got a lot of interesting archaeological and historical elements. And it is a game that is very interested in environmental issues and issues related to artificial intelligence. And I think that the first game, Horizon Zero Dawn, was a classic open world game and probably the best game that came out that year, but it was greatly overshadowed by Zelda. So Breath of the Wild just kind of stole its thunder. But I think anybody who's got access to a PlayStation 5 in particular, should check out Horizon Zero Dawn and hopefully also check out Forbidden West, which I think is coming relatively soon next year. I think it's February or March. I think they're going to get that out the door. So yeah, I can't wait for it to come. It was supposed to come out this year, but obviously delayed, like a lot of things were by the pandemic. So I'm still really looking forward to that. So,
and Horizon Zero Dawn is on PC, by the way.
Yes,
for people listening.
Yes,
so if you can run it, it's pretty cheap. And
yes.
If you didn't play it, you should. I recommend. I joined Bob in recommending it. It's a really good game. Really good game.
Okay, I am going to announce the next two categories because they are weirdly worded, and I apologize for that. So the first one is 2021's History Game of 2022. In other words, this is a game from this year that we hope to play more of next year, and we will definitely play more of next year. And my game for this category is Old World from Mohawk Games. This is Soren Johnson and Company's new 4X game set in kind of the classical era, late antiquity, and it is an excellent iteration on the Civilization formula. And I can't wait to play more of that game. I played a whole bunch kind of in the late summer, early autumn. And I wish I could have played more, but I was waylaid by other history games I had to play and grades to put in and classes to teach. And so this is a game that I've got loaded onto my laptop, and I can't wait to start playing it when I start traveling next year and into the spring and the summer. Hopefully, we'll see. I hope they get a chance to kind of iterate on this and maybe provide some DLC. I don't know what they have planned, but I can't wait to play more of this game.
Yeah. Well, for me, it's Svoboda 1945. I have to play that. I haven't played it yet. I have to play it. It's crazy that I haven't. Maybe if I'm lucky, I'm teaching this video games class in January. I might play it with my students. Perhaps we do that together in the classroom. But I need to play more of that game, and go from there, and probably play more Old World too. We just went through the category a minute ago. Spoiled for choice doesn't even begin to describe, our good fortune. If you're a history nerd, you play video games.
Yeah,
I think you're in good shape.
Yeah, yeah, definitely.
And then in terms,
go ahead. Sorry. No, you go ahead.
I was going to say, in terms of games from 2020 that I played this year, technically the correct answer for me in terms of number of hours is Crusader Kings 3. But that's a bit boring because people are sick of hearing me talk Crusader Kings games. I want to pick a game called Yes, Your Grace, which I played a lot of in the first half of the year. And people who don't know, it's a really nice kind of, it's a very attractive game. It's kind of a hand-drawn style indie type game where you play the ruler of this kind of, again, clearly medieval kingdom. And you're effectively kind of walking around your castle and talking to different family members and talking to different groups and bestowing favors upon subjects and entering into negotiations with allies or enemies and stuff. And it's just a very kind of a strategy RPG hybrid type game, which I really encourage people to check out. I kind of missed it when it came out in 2020, and I played it. I'm not sure how long. I spent a good few weeks earlier in this year just really enjoying it, and it's really worth a look. And just a really, again, Bob mentioned earlier what the good work that small teams are doing. Like what really impressed me with so many of these games, and Yes, Your Grace is a good example of this, is like just so impressed with how tight everything feels. Like people have really polished these games really well. Like you just don't need to make compromises, it seems, and that's so impressive. Yeah. So Yes, Your Grace is worth a look for people.
Gosh, that's a game that's been on my wish list for a long time. I haven't gotten a chance to play it, and it means a lot to me to have you mention that and recommend it. I definitely want to check that out. So that was your 2020's history game of 2021, right? So a game you played a lot this year. So my game from last year that I played a lot this year was Assassin's Creed Valhalla, and in particular, I played a lot of the Discovery Tour mode, which I think I ended up playing through twice. I played it through in kind of a pre-release version, and then I played through it, most of it again, once it came out. And I think this version of Discovery Tour mode, it answered a lot of my criticisms related to previous versions of Discovery Tour from Ubisoft. This is a version that has the kind of interactivity I was looking for. It has more robust, versions of historical information and entries in the database. It is something that's got a narrative structure, which I think really fits the style of game that it comes out of. Assassin's Creed Valhalla is really known for its narrative. And I think it's one that it is the closest of that the Discovery Tour modes have gotten so far of something that I would actually recommend somebody use in a classroom setting. I think the previous Discovery Tours for AC Origins and AC Odyssey, those were versions of Discovery Tour that I couldn't really recommend somebody try to use in a classroom. But this one I think has got enough going on. It's got enough historical weight. It's got citations. It's got enough interactivity where I could see it being used in a classroom setting or, outside of classroom for homework or an assignment or something like that. And so I think it kind of retroactively, this version of Discovery Tour, it made AC Valhalla more interesting to me because, I think Valhalla, it was by far the most popular in terms of sales and in terms of interest of the most recent AC games, Assassin's Creed games. But for me personally, not really interested in Vikings, not really interested in, kind of early medieval history. But now, having played that Discovery Tour mode, it's gotten me more interested in going back and trying to finish Valhalla, which is right now the only Assassin's Creed game I've never played through. So I'm about 40 hours into it and I just haven't finished.
Yeah, they're becoming.
So,
You have to, you
yeah,
have to pay someone to do your job for you for a
that's
couple
right.
weeks so you can
That's
play it.
right. That's
Yeah,
right.
yeah.
So, yeah. So Discovery Tour mode kind of reinvigorated my interest in AC Valhalla, which is something I didn't think could happen. I thought I was done with that game. And, I say that's a game that you could use in the classroom, but it isn't my recommendation for best game, history game of 2021 for the history classroom, just because of the price of Discovery Tour and then also kind of the technological limitations of most computers in history classes. Discovery Tour mode, you can play it on kind of the lowest graphical settings, but still it's a game that requires a lot of RAM. It requires a lot of memory on your computer, on your hard drive. It is a beast. And, most computers that I come into contact in my community college, John comes into contact, I'm sure, at his liberal arts college, these are computers that could not run this type of game. So, it's a game that I would recommend if you are at a research university that's got a lot of money. Maybe you could do that for your whole class. But as far as a general game to recommend for the history classroom, Discovery Tour mode is still just too far away from my perspective.
I will point out that Ubisoft and Amazon have kind of got a partnering thing. You could theoretically stream Valhalla
Yeah.
and Discovery Tour mode over the Amazon Luna service. My experience in third level education is that your access to a very high quality, fiber net or whatever it would be connection that would make such a thing doable is similar to the places that have that already have the computers that can run the game.
Yes. Yeah.
So if you happen to be in a situation where you'd like to use it and you have access to a really good, like wide, internet, like FiberNet or something like that, that might be an option for you. But yeah, otherwise, I just wanted to point that out. But yeah, Bob's right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Well, that brings us to our main category, which is actually our penultimate category, but it's the most important category for History Respawn, and that is History Game of 2021. So, John, why don't you give me your nominee, your winner? We'll say John's winner and my winner for History Game of this year.
We have a consensus, Bob.
No kidding.
We have a consensus.
Oh
we
my
do.
gosh.
So I know you kind of have an honorable mention. Do you want to talk about that first?
Well, my honorable mention is a game that I've played in the last couple of days, and it is Forbidden City. And this is a game that came recommended to me from various sources, but primarily from somebody in my DMs on Twitter. They were basically imploring me, this is a fan of History Respawn, imploring me to cover this game for most of the second half of the year on the show. And I was like, well, I don't know if I got time. There's so many other games that have come out. I don't know about this game. I'm interested in Roman history, but I feel like we've covered a lot of Roman history, over the past few years. I don't know. And so finally they got to me and I was just like, okay. And it came out on Game Pass, on Xbox Game Pass on PC. So I downloaded it during finals week at my school. And then, of course, the holidays hit. I was too busy. And then, I had this date for our podcast. And I was like, I've got to play Forbidden City before we get to that date. And so I finally loaded it up yesterday. And then I played through it from yesterday into the wee hours of this morning. And I got to say, I'm incredibly impressed by that game. Narratively, just really remarkable. It is excuse my language, but it is a Skyrim-ass Skyrim game. It is very much of that mold, but it's incredibly good, great story, and I like what it does with Roman history and Roman culture. It does interesting things where it kind of weaves in elements of Roman society and cultural differences between Rome and modern society. and makes that a part of the storyline. And it's a remarkable game. I really liked it, and it it just takes a few hours. I think I finished in about 5.5 hours. So yeah, Forbidden City I would say for me it's a distant second, but it is a highly recommended second place for me for history game of 2021.
Yeah, endorse. And that game does. It's hard to explain. Like you could go and you could Google Forbidden City. You could Google Forbidden City endings, for example, right?
Yes.
Which I wouldn't do before you play the game, but you could do that, and it just doesn't convey to you how fluid and how impressive the narrative kind of choices are in that game.
Yeah.
Like that's one of the coolest things about
Yeah.
that game.
And another thing, very briefly, is that it's a very difficult game to describe without spoiling it. So I'll just leave it at that.
Well, go ahead. You should announce the game, Bob, because we're in agreement. But
So this is consensus.
You should have
then.
the honor.
Okay.
Yep.
Well, so History Respawn's history game of the year for 2021 is Old World from Mohawk. So I just talked about this game, related to how I'm going to play more of it next year. And, in terms of what it did this year as a history game, I think it did a number of things that were really awesome. First thing is that it does something really interesting with history, and it limits the history that it looks at to the ancient era, right? And so it is a 4X game. It is a game that's cut from the same cloth as Sid Meier's Civilization, but is one that I think does a great job of enlivening the ancient world. And so this is an ancient world in Old World that is not just about Rome. It's not just about the Greeks, but it brings in other civilizations and other histories and other cultural legacies in a way that I feel like you could get a bit of from, say, a Civilization or Humankind. But because this game is focused on the classical era, the ancient era, it really helps to build up those histories for civilizations and for societies that I think tend to get glossed over, particularly when you're talking about, Western Civ courses or even world history courses. And it also is a great game for enlivening what is, I think a really important genre for historical games, and that is the 4X genre. So in terms of 4X games, Old World is a great innovation on elements of civilization. It gives us the order system, which gives a lot of tension to the moves that you can make each turn in the game. It has great elements of character-based storytelling, and taken from Paradox games like Crusader Kings 2. And it also has got really great quality of life improvements to 4X games, including the ability to undo commands.
Oh,
there's basically an undo button
so
like
good.
you would find in a word processor in this game. And so it's just a really incredible package. And I think my only negative thing to say about it is I wish more people talked about it, because this is a game that just recently it won PC Gamer Best Strategy Game for 2021. But I don't think it was even nominated for the Game Awards. And so, it's kind of one of these games that I think is really well known to a certain subset of players, but not necessarily well known in the same regard as Civilization or even Humankind. And I think what this game did this year was just phenomenal. So, History Respawn's history game of 2021, Old World. John, take it away. Anything you want to add?
Just to say, and I'm sorry I keep mentioning Humankind in the same conversation, because Old World deserves to be talked about on its own. And I think I would agree with everything Bob said about Old World. But I wanted Humankind to be a bigger part of this conversation in my own head.
Me too. Yeah.
And I think Amplitude continued. I think they did so many things that are impressive. So if you play Humankind, the things of being able to switch civilizations at certain points in the game, or have your community switch its identity and all these kinds of things, and trying to rethink how cities work. There's so many cool things Humankind did and tried to do. But Old World, and the thing about Old World was when the two games came out relatively close to each other, I preferred Old World, but I wouldn't say by some huge margin.
Mm.
But now that we're here at the end of the year, Old World is comfortably a better game for me because of everything else. They just they tuned it just right, and that decision to cap the game and keep you just, part of me wishes that you could, have the fighter jets and the classic Civ 4 type stuff. But choosing not to let the player do that was inspired. It was an inspired decision. I think the whole game was tighter as a result. And I think, Bob, that for you and me and for others interested, you know, it sidesteps one of civilization's classic problems, which is this, Whig history, right? Progressive history kind of issue. Now, not to say that it completely solves it, but and it allowed Old World to focus on, hey, we want you to focus on this female Egyptian ruler. We want you to focus on what the Romans would be like if they had to deal with the Babylonians in a different way, and so on. And it didn't feel trite or ham-fisted, or it just felt like, yeah, this was the most fun thing to do. This was the right way to do it. And they really, I'm delighted for them. I think it was an exceptional achievement. It's just a really good game.
Yeah.
It's just really good. It's the best history game this year. That was it.
And, I would say in terms of its notoriety, I think, what maybe hurt it a bit was the fact that it was only released on the PC on Epic Games. And so it is coming out on Steam, I think early next year, maybe by the summer of next year. So that should help its notoriety, I hope.
And I think that, I don't know, I think it's latent. I think it's mostly subconscious, but I think there's a bit of backlash against Epic, just even in the industry. I think a little bit. I think and I think there's a reluctance on the part of some critics, and I can see where they're coming from. There's a reluctance to get too invested in a game that has been really walled off in a certain way, and that's hard because I'm sure Mohawk Games made the decision it made for very good reasons. Not least of which creating a secure environment for your employees, which I know they care about. So, so that was well deserved. Will we finish off with a slightly more with a bit more self-indulgence with our non-history game of the year?
Yeah, so this is our nominee for game that might have some historical elements, but this is kind of something that we don't really consider to be a history game, that we think was a remarkable game for this year. And so, John, I'll let you go first.
Yeah, I want to make my second Seinfeld reference of the podcast. I want to channel some Festivus energy here, because Resident Evil Village is not getting the love that it deserves. I know we all think it came out in 2018 or something, and that's the problem, right? Because it was a long year. I get it. But it might be the best Resident Evil game I ever played.
Wow.
And I like Resident Evil games. So Resident Evil Village, for people who haven't played it, or if you played 7, you have to play Village. And Village to me felt a bit like Resident Evil 2 to Resident Evil 7's Resident Evil. It's more action focused for sure. The story is getting more outlandish. It's just it's a Capcom Resident Evil Japanese game with lots of white people in it, weird ass, corporations are bad kind of game. And it's a thrill ride, and it's nuts, and it's fun. And you all know about the giant vampire woman, but there's so much other cool stuff going on in that game. And I loved it. I thought it was the best game of the year.
Well,
best non-history game of the year.
John, I'm so embarrassed because I was afraid you were going to nominate that game, or you were going to make that your award winner for this category. And I'm embarrassed because I'm a huge Resident Evil fan, but I never got a chance to actually play Resident Evil Village. Resident Evil 8, I just got sucked into the semester, sucked into history games, and I just didn't have time to get around to Resident Evil Village. And I think the reason why I never played it was because I knew if I started playing it, I wouldn't be able to stop. It would be one of those games where I was like, okay, well, now that I've started this, I've got to finish it. And I just couldn't dedicate the time to that, when it came out. And then later on, when it got to the holidays, I had other things to play. I had to play Forbidden City, and so I'm embarrassed. I bought it. It's on my plate. It's loaded. on my PlayStation
Yeah.
5, and I haven't booted it up.
You
So
see,
I'm sad. I'm sad.
because I know for a fact, Bob, you're a huge Resident Evil fan, and all I can say is you're lucky. That's how I think about it. You have a pleasure awaiting you. I
A New
played it.
Year's present to myself.
Yeah, well, my family, the rest of my family went to see my in-laws, and I stayed here to work on the deck. And I played 4-hour Resident Evil Village gaming sessions. That doesn't happen anymore in my life.
Yeah.
So you're right. It's gonna.
Wow.
But how about you, Bob? What was your non-history game of the year?
So my non-history game of the year, it's a little bit complicated because, a game that I did have time for this fall was Deathloop. And this is a game that John's already talked about at length. Arcane Studios, and published by Bethesda. A weird game because it is like the last Bethesda game that we'll see on the PlayStation. It was a PlayStation exclusive, at least for a year. An amazing experience, and I thought a slam dunk game. I mean, I thought if you know anything about Arcane, they are the developers of the Dishonored series, and Deathloop is basically Dishonored with guns, except the combat is good and the stealth is better. And it's basically an Arcane game that works. And so anybody who's played Dishonored knows what I'm talking about, because those games, great on style, great on setting, but didn't always work the way that you felt as a player they should. But Deathloop does. And so I thought that is my game of the year. No question. Non-history game, history game, whatever you want to call it. But then at the end of this year, I started playing Halo Infinite. And I think my award winner for non-history game of the year is Halo Infinite from Microsoft. Yeah, I know, it's crazy. It's crazy. So
I believe its full title is Far Cry Halo Infinite.
Oh.
I'm sorry, I'm being.
Well, so Halo is a series that has never really interested me. I always played the Halo games late. I think I played the first Halo probably about 2004, so a good 4 years after it had come out. The same with Halo 2. I think I played John's version of Halo 3 in grad school. Same with ODST. And so I'd played everything up to 4, and I never played 5. And I was having very strongly worded text message threads with John Harney all the way up to the release of Halo Infinite, basically declaring, why is anybody interested in this? These games stink, right? They're not interesting anymore, And so then the game comes out, it gets good reviews, and I'm like, okay, well, you know what? I've got Game Pass. I've got enough space on my hard drive. I might as well, just try it out. So then I can have an informed opinion and also hate it. And then I played it, and it is fantastic. It's one of the best. Now I've played a bit of the multiplayer. I had a fire team of other historians put together, and we played for several hours, and it's really good. But my recommendation involves the campaign, which I think is one of the best single player campaigns since 2016, since Doom 2016 came out, and since Titanfall 2 came out. I think it's the best one of those campaigns since those games. And it is a combination of what makes Halo a success, but it's also a combination of what makes open world games a success. And in particular, it takes the best parts of open world games like Far Cry and kind of whittles them down to what makes them work as an open world mechanic, but then also what makes them work best with Halo. And I loved it. And I played through the campaign, played through the side missions, and I'm seriously debating at this point going back and replaying the campaign because I loved it so much. I mean,
wow.
And I feel like I've got it nominated for this category because it's a game that I was so negative on. I looked at the pre-release coverage. I looked at the videos from last year when they had to delay it. I considered my kind of past disinterest in the series, and I was like, wow, this is not going to be great. This is going to stink. I basically thought the game was going to fail. And to have my opinion so overturned in the opposite direction, it's an experience that I've had with the game very, very few times in my life. And so, if you've got a PC, an Xbox, highly recommend you at least try Halo Infinite. And it is a game that starts slow. So give it a couple hours, wait until you get to the open world section, and then kind of judge it on those merits.
That's great. I think the world's a better place with good Halo games.
Yeah.
That's what any console player our age, many of us feel that way.
Well, and I didn't think it could be done. I was like, it can't be done. And I had the same opinion of Doom 2016. You know, when that came out, I was like, oh, this can't be done. You can't bring Doom back, right? It's so old, you know. Nobody cares. And it was amazing. And I feel like Halo hit that same high. And, you know, I think if you go out and read criticism, the story has gotten knocked quite a bit. I think for good reason. I feel like the story is trying to tie up and clean up a lot of loose ends from Halo 5, which I think by and large was considered a disaster. And so I feel like you almost can't judge the story on its own because it's trying to fix those problems. But I think it works well enough on its own to make the game a huge success. And listen, I'm completely stunned that this has happened, that I'm nominating a Halo game as my non-history game of the year. But here we are. You know, I eat crow. I'll eat my hat, whatever you want. It's a complete reversal. I'm stunned.
I think that's a great place to leave it, though. Like I said, I said for the last year and a half, there's already a Halo game. It's called Destiny 2. And
whoa.
But I'm wrong. Yeah, as in like that. If you want to play Halo, just play that. But I was wrong. And I was joking when I said the world's a better place with a good Halo game. But I don't know. It does feel like, hey, I don't know. Let's just listen. A bit of optimism going into 2022. I'm all for that. So I'll take it as an omen of good things to come.
Yeah.
That there's a good Halo game out there.
Yeah. Okay. Well, John, thanks for joining me on this episode. And dear listener, thank you for joining us on this episode. I hope you enjoyed the show. If you are interested in History Respawn's back catalog of content, please visit our website at historyrespawn.com. And if you enjoy our work, please consider supporting our show by going to Patreon, www.patreon.com/historyrespawn. And until next time, hopefully not too distant future, not 2 months into the future. Until next time, dear listener, goodbye.
Okay. Happy New Year.
Yeah.
We should say Happy New Year.
Oh, yeah. We should say Happy New Year. We'll leave this in. Happy New Year, dear listener. Goodbye.